Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'm bringing you an interview with Luke Purdye, director of the short film Mail Order Queens, which was selected as a finalist for the 2024 Student Academy Awards. Before I jump into the interview, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Luke Purdye is a freelancer working across science, natural history, document, and commercial spaces who strives to tell extraordinary stories that connect people with the natural world. After studying psychology and zoology at the University of Bristol, he worked for NGOs and then large corporations in environmental, sustainability, and human rights roles for just under a decade, before embarking on a new career chapter in 2022, a BBC scholarship at the National Film and Television School, pursuing a degree in directing and producing science and natural history. He joins me on the podcast to talk about his short film, Mail Order Queens, which was selected as a finalist in the documentary category of the 2024 Student Academy Awards. Luke, welcome to the show.
Hello, Jonathan. Thank you for having me on.
So let me start off by asking you what drew you to the subject of the film. It's the documentary about beekeeping, specifically in the UK, which also provides quite a bit of history about beekeeping. How did you learn about this history? Why did you decide to make this the subject of your film?
I first came to this film, I guess it was out of necessity. I was developing my graduate film at the NFTS for my MA, and I had a couple of ideas fall through with regards to access, and one of them that was a reasonably developed stage was a story about a group of beekeepers living just outside of London who were using beekeeping as a restorative tool to help with PTSD and anxiety. And this group of beekeepers were Syrian refugees, and they were helping other displaced people. That project didn't come good. I think it was an access issue, but it was, something I probably should have. I think there was perhaps another filmmaker making a project, and I didn't ask the right questions early on enough, which is a mistake that I will endeavor not to make again. But nonetheless, I was developing that, and I'd found out that they were using a particular strain of bee, which is the Apis mellifera, which is the European dark honeybee or the British black bee. So it's so a bit of background about bees, I guess, might be helpful. But all honeybees are the same species. They are Apis mellifera. And like many species, there's different subspecies or strains that vary depending on the geography. And those strains have particular morphological, genetic, biophysiological traits that lend themselves to that particular area. So the bees in Italy and the bees in Slovenia and the bees in Britain and the bees in Africa all have variation, but nonetheless they can interbreed successfully because they're the same species, Apis mellifera. So the British black bee was claimed to have been made extinct around the turn of the 20th century. And I found out about this through developing this idea with the Syrian refugees, and they were using this British black bee. And I thought there was a really nice sort of equilibrium, this British black bee that had been marginalized and forgotten and potentially extinct, and then actually it wasn't, it was just overlooked, it was here all along, being helped by another group that arguably are sort of marginalized in society as well, so the refugees. And I think my teacher thought that it was overly political and for a natural history film, and regardless the access didn't come good, and but I was left with this other story, or the startings of a story, which was this fascinating history of the British black bee and beekeeping in general. And I started to dig into that, and I was working with my head of department at the school, and he was fascinated by this. He just thought, it's an inherently very, bees already occupy this very rich and romantic cultural space. And, on top of that, you've got this sort of shadowy monk, Brother Adam, who's gone on this quest to create the perfect bee and traveled to almost every continent, like tens of thousands of kilometers, and capturing little, bits of genetic information and bringing these bees back and kind of blending them together to breed a bee that was ostensibly, in beekeepers' eyes, the perfect bee, because it removed all of the traits which beekeepers find troublesome and decrease efficiencies and those sorts of things. And I thought that was absurd and really entertaining and just like a wonderful story which I'd never heard of. And then I kind of started to uncover the other sides of it as I spoke to different potential contributors or individuals who helped me, research and develop the story further, with regards to the idea that beekeeping is seen as a tool in the fight against declining honeybee numbers, when in actual fact, beekeeping, if it's done in a particular way, particularly if you're buying queen bees from abroad and you're sort of affecting the genetic flow of information and making local bees less adapted to their area, has the potential to be damaging. There's also this transmission of diseases, because the queen bees and the workers that they come with are vectors can be vectors for disease, and that's how we ended up with varroa mite. And there are other very serious ones that are kind of just around the corner. And so there was this whole kind of world of beekeeping that was, the reality is it completely subverts our expectations of this species, which I think occupies a really unique kind of cultural space, in that there's no other animal that is considered so fundamental as a kind of keystone pollinating species, yet is also viewed as a matter of course, as completely contingent on human beings. And that's, they're managed, which is they're not domesticated in the same way that, sheep or cattle are. They can survive in the wild just fine if they swarm and find a new nest in a tree. Well, unless they're not adapted to that environment, and which is often the case. But in theory, they can just revert back to their natural instinctive colony level behavior. But they can also be managed. So they occupy this kind of liminal space between domestic and wild animals. And they're also viewed as, human beings are somehow required for them to persist, which is not actually the case. And I thought all of that was really fascinating. And so I just kind of delved into it. And then the story was really, the way that I told the story and the characters I found were part of product of access, but also just were emergent of the story unfolding. And it could have been a much bigger story. I think there's loads more to tell with regards to, global populations of honeybees are actually increasing exponentially because of the bee industry. And then you have these very oversimplified conservation campaigns. It's starting to change a little bit now, but the conservation campaigns in the UK, at least historically, were save the bees. And so that drew a lot of people to beekeeping, thinking this is the thing that's going to help save the bees. And in actual fact, that's probably one of the worst things that you could do if you want to save the bees. The real problem is to do with the wild bees, the solitary bees, the other types of colony-dwelling bees, which are not, which don't produce honey. The wasps, the bumblebees, of which there are like almost over 100 species, I think, and their numbers have declined along with lots of insects, like really, really drastically in the last 100 years. And that's the actual problem.
Right.
And we're just,
There's a
they
lot more
don't
to
have
it.
an industry to prop them up and fill that gap that's left when the bees or whatever the species is declines in population because of all of the normal pressures, to do with climate, to do with habitat loss, to do with pesticide use and other things. But yeah, I'm being a bit sciencey. Maybe I should talk about the filmmaking a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, that's the story, and it's a really rich really rich, really entertaining story, and I thought that there was a lot there that I could do a lot with it, and so I didn't have much of a choice at that stage. I had to pick something. So my teacher was like, it was that or go to Namibia and make a film about a colony of brown hyenas on the Skeleton Coast, which would have been amazing, but I wasn't really sure what the story was. And I think it's always better to pick the strong story over the exciting and adventurous experience. Not that Buckinghamshire can't be exciting and adventurous, but I did live there at the time, so.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about kind of the where you came up with the idea and how you landed on that. Talking a little bit more about the film, like you said, how did you go about kind of striking the balance? You have some archival footage of Brother Adam that you mentioned, with some photographs as well. Talking about the history part, you've got some kind of the talking heads interviews with, present day beekeepers and people who are interested in that work. And then obviously you have some beautiful shots of bees themselves with a wonderful narration over the top of that as well. How did you go about striking that balance between those, the history, the current talking heads, and the narration part with the animals themselves?
Well, I set out, I said earlier that it was all emergent of the story, and that's true to a degree, but I did set out with the intention of making a documentary that blended natural history, in particular lots of macro, with its human story. And then in order to tell the human story, there was archive, as you say, there was interviews, and there was a bit of actuality. And I felt that, and I wanted those worlds to meet, because I think that I'm always drawn to stories that are about the relationship between humans and our natural environment, whether or not that's a kind of natural phenomenon or a particular species or a landscape or a place or a style of agriculture, or, and I think that the kind of the format of blue chip wildlife documentaries and it has its place, but I think there's a really rich vein of storytelling where you start to interrogate the space between us and our natural world. And I think that it's actually, it's really necessary. And so I wanted to stage it. I wanted the most important moments to be in that space between, which is why you have these musical moments where the music crescendos, and you have, one of my favorite moments of the film is where the music sort of swells at the end of the act with Brother Adam's modern day successors, Claire and Martin, and you have this big purple rubber glove reaching in to pick up the scraper, and all of these, it's shot with a probe lens, and all of these bees going absolutely nuts. And I just, I was so, when I got that, I was like, God, I just loved how it looked, and how you got that quite wide depth of field. And it was shot on an FX6, but it was off speed, obviously. So It was about 120. It was the highest it will go before it drops down to 4K, off 4K. So I think it must have been 120 and frames per second. And, those moments where you get that interaction, but your question was about balance, and I guess I wanted a big part of this film was about those crossing over points. Like, when do you, because they're different scales of organization, in one moment you're in the human world. And I think that's why it hasn't been done that much, because it can feel a little bit incoherent, and it probably does in my film. I definitely think that there's probably a bit too much content. I could have made it a bit more, but I'd like to say that the kind of maximalist thing was intentional, but it wasn't. It was just that I couldn't choose what not to include, so I just included everything. But hey, it's been nominated for a Student Academy Award, so I must have done something right.
Right.
But yeah, I, like most filmmakers, I'm a worst critic, so I still watch it and go, oh, really, why did you include that bit? But it was hard to know. I really wanted to do all of it. I wanted to experiment, and the good thing about doing the MA is like you have an opportunity to, within reason, directorially, and making these creative decisions about tone and form and in particular the visual language, because I was shooting most of it myself. I came back with a mishmash, and that was intentional. I did want to capture some really novel feeling macro that wasn't just that sort of very pristine thing, but also, and that at the start you kind of get that. I wanted to kind of, with the bait and switch, I wanted it to feel like it was in that world, the kind of blue chip world, and then you come into a slightly different world where the bees are treated with slowly the bees are treated with more reverence as you progress through the film, to the point where you realize that they're really not contingent on human beings. In fact, it's the other way around, and we should be deferent to our bee overlords. Well, no, I said maybe it's the wild bees. I tried not to pass to be as objective as possible in the making of the film, in terms of whether or not I was, biased one way or the other, or that the film was actually saying that there was a right answer. And I don't think there really is a right answer. So tried to end in an open-ended way. You can never do that completely. And I ended up with, beekeeping forums being quite angry at me. And also the other side, I'm sure that the sort of natural beekeepers or the conservationists probably don't think it's done enough to lambast the other side. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, if you're making both sides mad, then you're probably doing something right, because you're making a conversation about it at least.
Well, I mean, I hate to sound like I'm not a beekeeper and I've never kept bees myself, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to weigh in on this as outside of the realm of the film itself. But I guess I spent enough time in that world to be able to have an opinion. But the one thing that's true of beekeepers is that they are extremely opinionated. And there was a bit that it didn't make it into the film, but it was something that I got Jed to, it's a sort of a saying that beekeepers, several of them said to me, is if you ask three beekeepers the same question, you'll get 6 answers, or some variation of that. Like, the number can fluctuate between like double the number of people you asked or up to 1,000, just because they are renowned for being having very strong opinions and being quite stubborn, which perhaps comes across in the film. I'm not sure.
For sure. Yeah. Now, you mentioned a little bit ago the one shot with the hand reaching in and the bees, which I agree was one of the best ones of the film. But there's so many great shots of the bees themselves. It seems like you're right in there, right in the hives with them in many cases. You talked a little bit about the camera you use, but how did you go about getting all of those shots, and also how many times did you get stung by bees in making this film?
Well, I got stung many times is the answer to your second question. Probably I would say about 13 or 14 times. And I think that was it. In general, there was more towards the end of the shoot, because I became increasingly gung-ho about my
getting right in there with them.
My PPE. Well, there's certain things that you shouldn't do, which is stand in front of the hive entrance. That's a big no-no for beekeepers. But obviously, if you want to get your probe lens in the right place, you kind of have to get in there. So I got stung a lot. How did I go about filming the bees? Well, I was doing it through the school, and so they were quite hot on health and safety. Not that you wouldn't be in a production proper, but we had to sort of make sure all of the risk stuff was quite, on the nose. So we had all the correct, I had gloves, and I have beekeeping suits stacked in a spare room that I should probably get rid of, because so if anyone wants to buy any beekeeping suits, just give me a call. There are a lot of PPE, which was kind of horrible, because you have this mesh, and then, whether if you're using a viewfinder or you're looking at a monitor, it really obscures your view. So it's quite difficult. And it's the middle of summer, and it was quite a hot summer as well. So the whole thing is pretty unpleasant, but it's quite fun as well. Like, when I brought sound recorders with me, they were always really excited. And like some of the BTS, like when we were shooting the sequence of the bee blowing with Jed, I mean, it's crazy because you've got millions of bees around you, and they're all really agitated, because they've been taken out of their hives and blown off this honeycomb with a bee blower. So it was a real amazing scene, amazing. And so, but like filming those conditions, quite challenging. Similarly, whenever I filmed with an old beekeeper when I did the stuff inside the colonies, and that was really interesting, and I was really happy. That stuff is kind of spliced into as if it were inside the colonies with the Claire and Martin, and I think that looks really good. And when I got that, I was like, wow, this is cool. Has anyone done this before? I feel like this is new, but I'm sure someone's done it, or maybe. But it was quite simple. I just put a light above it and then stuck the probe lens in and sort of tried to do some quite poorly executed tilts, which didn't make the final cut, but I was convinced were going to be this exceptional piece of cinema, but they didn't. That one didn't work out. There was a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor. There was a lot of rushes actually. But yeah, that's how I went about it with a certain degree of difficulty, but with quite a lot of excitement. It was a very addicting shoot. It was quite, it was, and the nice thing about doing it in the UK was there wasn't that intensity of like, I need to get this now. I could kind of shoot, and then I could look at the rushes, and I could think about what worked and what didn't, and then I could go back to the apiary who I was working. Like, if it was, for example, this beekeeper who was just down the road from where I was living. Obviously, with some of the other shoots, like at Blenheim with Philippe and Guy, and also with Buckfast, that was more time limited, but it was still quite, it was at least 2 days for each. So there was a lot of kind of trial and error. It wasn't like this is the only time this is going to happen, which sometimes happens with wildlife.
Excellent. And we mentioned it a little bit earlier, the narration of the film. Loved the narration provided by Anna Sava, I believe it is.
Yeah, Anna Sava.
Talking about the bees. Her voice just made it so soothing, sitting there listening to her, watching the bees kind of fly in slow motion. How did you get connected with her? And obviously, I think it speaks for itself why she was the right choice to narrate the story.
Yeah, I was looking for. I had very high aspirations. I think initially there had this long list of like lots of famous British actors, and then I left it too late to send the press packs or like try and get them on board. And so I was looking. I had some backups from different voice actor agencies, and I knew I wanted a woman, and I wanted her to be over 45, and I wanted a sort of warmth and an intelligence. I wanted her to be kind of embracing the audience and bringing them along, rather than they didn't, maybe a little bit of wryness, but a kind of knowing wryness where you're kind of bringing someone into something, as opposed to like, I know something you don't, and I'm going to hold it back from you. And then, this is the big thing. It was like there needed to be a kind of slightly maternal element to it, and a warmth and a kind of compassion to her. And then I was looking through, and I found Anna, and I reached out to the agency with Meet the Joneses, and they came back and said her rate is X amount, and it wasn't inclusive of festival submissions. And I just went, oh, sorry, that's prohibitively expensive, and left it. And I thought, oh God, what am I doing? I need someone, and she's really good. I can't do this myself. I was going to get my dad to do it, and my sound designer. My dad's Glaswegian, and he's quite performative, but he wouldn't have been as good. Hopefully he'll never watch this. But and then I thought I showed my sound designer Lucas a clip of Anna, and then I had a clip of my dad reading some guidecom, and he was like, no disrespect to your dad, but let's get the professional to come. And
gotta be Anna.
And I reached out again, and I'd already sent across. I think I sent across some more material and asked them, like, would she be willing to make an exception, and like we could do it for this amount of money. So I increased the amount I was willing to pay, but I said it needs to be inclusive of of like global festival rights. And her agent then went to her, and she then watched, I think it was like an edit. It was an edit script and like a little bit of rushes and some assets and stuff, and the whole package together. She was like, "This is actually a really nice project," and she agreed to do it for that amount of money. And then the actual experience of recording her was so nice. It was like one of the most lovely days of post production, just because she arrived and she was so thrilled to be contributing, and she thought the story was wonderful. And I know I said she needed to be maternal. I went to the film school's cafeteria to get her a cup of herbal tea with her, and the dinner lady mistook her for my mother because she's also got curly hair, which I thought was quite funny. And then we went and recorded, and it was a morning of recording, and she was just fantastic. As soon as she it clicked what she wanted in terms what we were looking for. And I really wanted to like emphasize because of the theatricality of the archive from Brother Adam, and the Monk and the Honeybee, which is also fantastic. You know, it was such a boon to get that, and it really helped tell that story. And all of you mentioned photographs, all of the stills that you kind of punch in on, everything is from that same archive source. And you know, with that, and then Anna's voice, we could really turn it into, I think this is why the beekeeping forums didn't like it, because they wanted it to be a comprehensive laydown of like the science and the economy. And it's like, this is a film and it's not really for beekeepers. It's for a general audience to be like,
right,
oh my God, this is weird. What's that? That's bizarre. What a strange, what a kind of evocative and romantic and absurd story. I'm so surprised to hear that. I mean, that's not what audience members say, but you get the impression that's what
yeah,
a description of the feelings that I wanted them to think like. And Anna offered this like amazing sort of storytelling device to just really pump up the theatricality of the whole thing with her beautiful voice. And her delivery was just impeccable. Like her timing was amazing, and like the roundness of her voice and the whole thing was after we got that like in the can, and then we started to put it in situ and like to edit it and make selections. And we were doing that obviously over a locked cut of the film, a picture lock. I was like, oh, that's changed this quite substantially. It's turning into something that I kind of aspired to, but I wasn't sure that you never know, because it only takes one kind of piece for the whole thing to sort of fall down a little bit. But I guess that's what I was saying earlier about, it's always like this creature that emerges, the creature being a film, is emergent of so many different things, and it takes on a life of its own. And Anna and all of these like little kind of not just decisions, but like coincidental things. Like I could have not reached out to her a second time and asked if she'd be willing to do it for less money. I might have just ended up with my dad. Maybe that would have been also good. I don't know, but it is what it is. But it seems kind of serendipitous or potentially like improbable that it ends up in the way that it does, but that's where it does end up.
Right.
And I think there's something really lovely about that.
For sure. Now, we've touched on a lot of different pieces of the film. Obviously mentioned at the top that you are a Student Academy Award finalist. Is there any festivals, any screenings coming up where people can check out the film if they're interested in what they like or what you've been talking about?
Yeah, there's Green Screen in Eckernford in Germany, which I'm going to. I'm also a finalist for Grierson Award. I don't know. I think there's a ceremony for that. I need to find out if I know there's a ceremony for the Student Academy Awards, but I keep on meaning to check with the school whether they're sending us there or not. I should really look into that. But I know that's in October, and I hope so. And there was one other in the UK. Oh, there's one in Ménage, which is a tiny little village in France. I am doing a couple of screenings in London. If you and Bristol in the UK. And if you find me on Instagram at Luke Purdye, LukePurdye, and send me a message, I can share details of the private screenings that I'm planning for London and Bristol this October.
Excellent. We'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can keep track of your Instagram and keep tabs on when those are coming up. I'm going to move on to some things not about the film. This might be the hardest question I ask of the day, but if you had to pick your top 3 films of all time, what would they be?
And it's a really difficult question. I think it's an impossible question. I'm going to say my favorite film when I was growing up was The Blues Brothers. And I guess it's definitely my favorite musical film. Not that I'm a big musical buff, but I watched that film with my dad a lot. I haven't watched it for a long time. It might not stand up to my modern day scrutiny and tastes, but yeah, Blues Brothers, definitely an animation, maybe Ratatouille. And then it's difficult for I guess I should put a documentary in. I put one documentary and one fiction. I watched a really good documentary it was during development for Mail Order Queens, and it was called The Truffle Hunters, which is about a group of elderly Italian men living in the sort of hills of northern Italy, all kind of vying to have, they had their sort of secret truffle hunting spaces. And it's really just there's a very loose story, and it sort of, I really loved their big wide, these big wide double shot interview setups. And they're just conversations really. And then they just take snapshots of these conversations. And I was trying to emulate some of that when I did for Claire and Martin, and for Philippe and Guy, that conversational and interactional way of telling the stories. So I think it adds a really nice human element. And I also just thought the cinematography and it was so precise and intentional and in the Truffle Hunters. So I really rated that. And then finally, fiction, I couldn't say overall, but I watched Io Capitano a couple of nights ago, and I thought that was by Matteo Garrone. I thought that was pretty special. The sort of magical realism and just really. I watched some really disappointing series recently, and I was just getting so frustrated with this awful garbled storytelling and really unintentional choices, things being unmotivated and feeling flabby and I don't know. It was, I'm not going to say what it was, but I was just surely it's not they're putting so much effort into this. Come on, do it better.
Do it right.
And then I got a movie subscription. And I was am I allowed to name check it? I'm not paid by movie, by the way.
Absolutely.
And I was I maybe I will be now. And then me and my partner watched Io Capitano, and right when it started, I was oh my god, finally! It was just that all of the really beautiful movements, and everything was really intentional. Performances were fantastic. The storytelling was really precise, but felt really authentic. I don't know. It was just a real joy to watch. But it's probably not my favorite fiction film ever. I couldn't say what that was, but it's
Sure.
definitely high on my list of recent films. That in recent memory, it's my favorite film. So I'll go with that.
Definitely. I actually have the DVD sitting in front of my TV right now that I've been meaning to watch for a couple of days. So you've elevated it to the top of my list.
You're in for a treat. You're in for a treat. I mean, it's tragic. But it's also, it's very human. I found it quite easy to watch, and I could sometimes when something is, where the tension is creates a bit of anxiety, and you're am I enjoying this?
Right.
Do I enjoy this experience? But it's also very human and quite warm. It's not despite the subject matter and the migrant crisis and the tragedy of so much of that, and it's not misanthropic at all. It's it's very human and very warm, and I think that's actually kind of quite affirming in a way. It's nice to experience that.
Sure.
Yeah, you're in for a treat.
Excellent. Now, I have a similar question, but a little bit of a different vein. If you could invite any 3 movie characters to your next dinner party, who would they be?
Yeah. I guess since I said Ratatouille, I'd have to invite Remy the rat.
He can cook for you.
He can cook. He can cook. And yeah, and also you have the novelty of speaking to him via, maybe he pulls your hair. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think you get that sort of like Robin Williams's character in Good Will Hunting. That sort of like you're sort of like a protege. You're the kind of up and coming academic protege. That's what when you have a tutor at university, he's like you're going to go far. That sort of experience where it's like, he's a really dependable sort of intellectual figure that you could have. Ideally, you could have nice conversations with that character. Although he's a bit troubled. And then finally, I think it needs to be some women. So maybe Minerva McGonagall. I don't know. Someone who can do magic. Yeah. There's a lot of children's characters there. Maybe actually,
Okay.
I think I read more books in my childhood than I did when I was since I've been an adult. So probably stands to reason.
Makes sense. And speaking of reading, do you have any books that you could recommend that you've read recently? And they don't have to be about movies, could be fiction or nonfiction, whatever you're reading lately.
I reread Laurie Lee's As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning this summer, and it was one of my favorite books when I read it in my early 20s, and it's still one of my favorite books. I think it's it's a sort of, I think it's the second part in Laurie Lee's autobiographical trilogy. The first one is Cider with Rosie, and he's from a similar part of the world as me. He grew up in Gloucestershire, I grew up in Herefordshire, so obviously it was a sort of very different time, but he walks from Slad in Gloucestershire to London, and then gets on a boat and goes to Spain. And it's sort of, at a time when the world was industrializing, but there was still a sort of romance to it. And his writing is, very, very Mediterranean and evocative and rich. And yeah, it's lovely. I mean, the storytelling is not especially, it's got quite a loose, it's just kind of him traveling through this place and having different experiences, but it's not like, because it's his life story, there's not like this like very strong narrative line through it, but it's incredibly, it's like it's a book equivalent of a mood piece. But that's quite nice if it's like summary and you want to feel that way. And it's very pleasing to read. So I'd say that if you've not read it, give it a go and start with Cider with Rosie.
Excellent. We'll put some links to those in the show notes as well, so people can check those out. And lastly, before we wrap things up, do you have any other projects lined up that you're working on? And obviously, we already mentioned the social media, so people can follow you there, hopefully to keep tabs on any new projects.
I've got some in development, but they're not yet funded. Yeah, you can check out any new projects that I'm trying to crowdfund or I announce, I'll do so via my Instagram and also my website, which is lukepurdye.com, Purdye. Yeah, I think I wouldn't like to say anything specific because I've not confirmed anything. I'm working on commercial work at the moment. Sure. I'm doing a sort of something for a cafe shot on a kind of chain of cafes shot on 16mm about heritage grain. But it's actually it's looking really nice. I'm just editing that at the moment, but I came out of school and I really needed some money, and so I just started doing commercial stuff. I don't know important. If the factual and the unscripted space and industry in the UK is in a bit of a pits at the moment, so it's probably the worst possible time to be graduating and trying to break into a new industry. So if anyone wants to commission me to make a film, I've got lots of ideas. Or if you want to hire me as a producer or a director, you can do that too. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I was interested. What did you think of did you enjoy the film? What was your sort of like?
Yes, absolutely. I did enjoy the film. I was, like you said, at one point there was a lot. It felt like there was a lot more. It felt like it could have been a feature, and I'd almost be interested to see the feature version of this if you ever decide to expand the idea. But yeah, cinematography was beautiful. Like I said, of the bees, and new story to me. I've heard very little about the story, about that world. So it was very insightful. Very much enjoyed it.
Good. I'm really glad. Yeah, like you say, all the stuff about the Save the Bees campaign and there's so much other nuance to this, and lots of bizarre, eccentric, not just characters, but like processes. Like, for example, bees mate on the wing. So they do it in this, they mate the bees, some of the bees that are imported from, I was trying to get access, and he didn't end up replying to my emails in the end. You have to do it on an island. So there's this bee breeder in Denmark where there's lots of sort of little archipelagos off the coast, and so this Danish sort of like legendary bee breeder called Kjeld Brandstrup, who's like this really severe Danish man who just like, there's some interviews of him on YouTube, they're absolutely hilarious. He's just like not giving an inch to the camera. Like he's not performative in any way, which is like perfect. Someone who just doesn't sort of flinch when you stick a camera in their face. They just carry on saying what they feel. And they take the queen from the one colony they want to breed, and then the drones from the other colony, and they take them to this small island and they release them. And because they won't cross the water, they stay there. But it means that those queens can't be mated with any other contaminating genetic material, and they mate on the wing, so they fly around. And then the queen stores that sperm for the rest of her life, and that is used to produce all of the workers who populate the colony.
That's incredible.
And, like, there's stuff like that. There's loads of stuff like that, and the character is amazing. The natural history side of it is just absolutely bonkers. It's stranger than fiction.
Yeah, let's get Luke funded for a feature-length documentary about bee breeding.
I want to do the mail order queens feature if anyone wants to pay me to do it.
Definitely.
Lovely to talk, Jonathan.
Yes, Luke, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Loved hearing all about making the movie, and look forward to some future projects coming from you in the near future, hopefully.
Fantastic. All right. Take care.
Thank you again to my guest today, Luke Purdye. His short film, Mail Order Queens, was selected as a finalist for the 2024 Student Academy Awards. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eacherberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eacherberg. Please be sure to come back for my next episode, where I speak with Julia Krupinska, Ezekiel Garibay, and Tyan Westrad, directors of the short film El Ombligo de la Luna. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.